Hi, I'm Sarah from The Upcoming. A real pleasure to be able to speak to you today. Maybe we could just begin with a really brief introduction to this incredible documentary. What can people expect when they watch it?
Hi, I'm Lisa Cortés, the director of Little Richard, I Am Everything. I think that you're going to have a fun rock and roll roller coaster ride through Richard's life and discover that he's more than somebody who sang Rubber Ducky on Sesame Street or told people to shut up. He is such an important part of rock and roll history, not only for his music and innovation, but also for inspiring so many of the great rock and roll artists who followed him.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess as you've hit on there, a lot of people will know the name, will know something about Little Richard, but perhaps have not got the full story, or there's misconceptions there. There seemed like there was this bit of a gap in people's education and knowledge to really understand who he was and this incredible impact he's had on popular culture and the legacy that he's had. But what was your way in? What was the initial spark of the idea, and why did you want to make the documentary?
Um, Richard passed away in May of 2020. It was a very dark, challenging early days of the pandemic. And whenever someone dies who's a music artist, you start hearing their music all over. And in this case, I just remembered how, as a child, hearing Tutti Frutti and dancing around with my cousins, and even now, my niece and my great niece, who's 3 years old, I can play her Tutti Frutti, and it's just so much fun. Um, it sparked a desire to learn more about him, and then discovering that there had not been a feature-length documentary. And the more I started with his reading his autobiography that he wrote with Charles White, and it was like each page was a revelation about how he figured out how to get out of Macon, Georgia, how he was befriended by, a queer community, how he has these hits. And so I was just like, there's so much here. He's done so much. And he has this great tension in his life. So then I sought to, in making the doc, find his voice to tell his story. He is the narrator. He has the agency to give you his perspective on who he was and how he became that person.
Mm. And I mean, it is just so much, isn't it, to try and encompass kind of a whole life and all the different themes that you could pull out. And you've done an extraordinary job of bringing together so many different elements. But where did you even begin? Because of course you've got kind of archival material, you've got sort of interviews, and then you're sort of pulling on different types of kind of archival footage, which are kind of more going back in history and things like that. So where did you begin to find all that and piece it together to make your narrative?
Well, it started with doing a big sweep to see how much archival of Richard we could find. Richard narrating his story from cradle to grave. Like, I knew I wanted him to take us on this journey. And then the next part was, well, who are the friends, family, musicians, scholars who are going to help to be in conversation with Richard? Because at times he says things that we as an audience go, that's not true. I do these little charts with the different categories and do a wish list. And what's interesting is you talk to one person and they go, you really should talk to this person. That was the case with Lee Angel and Sir Lady Java. I went to Los Angeles and Lee Angel, I couldn't find a number for her. I wrote a note, I slid it under her door. I went to breakfast with the other producers and I looked out at my phone and I'm seeing all these missed calls from an LA number. And so it was Lee, and I picked her up, and she joined us for breakfast. And as we were talking, she said, "You know, you really need to talk to Sir Lady Java also." Richard introduced us. Java knew Richard from when they were very young. So that's kind of, how all of that starts to organically grow. And then, our brilliant editors take all of this and start looking at, like, then, Lisa wants to do these dreamscapes. How do we incorporate the performances by Valerie June, Sir Corey Henry, and John P. Key? How do we create a vocabulary of energy and particles so that by the time we get to a dreamscape, all of the visual effects that are there are in keeping with visual effects that have been established before? So it's very complicated. It took a good 2 years, but we were also encouraged by the spirit of Richard, right? Richard is not, it's not going to be a humdrum story. He gives you so much color, and he's a great storyteller. So, he became kind of the internal voice I was always listening to.
And as you say, I mean, there are just so many golden moments, whether from performances or from interviews, and then also, sort of the input from others. Did you have a favorite bit of archival footage that you found, or a favorite interview? I mean, yeah, even hearing like Mick Jagger saying, like, oh, kind of nicked some of my moves from him, or just kind of seeing his really flamboyant and an incredible way of speaking in interviews just is such a joy to watch and listen to. So did you have a favorite bit?
I love the mirrored, give me my mirrored suit. I think that's like the best. It's so much fun. It speaks to like how Richard is the consummate performer. And Janet Joplin is preceding him. He's seeing that she is killing the audience. And he tells his road manager, Keith Winslow, go get in the limo, go to the hotel room, get me my mirrored suit. I love Keith's delivery because you can tell he's back literally in time when he's telling the story. And then, the Richard as the ultimate showman, who is like, turn off the lights, jumps on top of the piano. And then when the lights come on and hit his mirrored suit, he's, you know that he has arrived and nobody else can follow him, and no one else is going to give a performance like that. And I think the mirrored suit moment speaks to his boldness, his innovation, his ability to declare himself loudly in spaces that might be challenging for him.
And in terms of the different sort of themes that you could pick out, and there's a lot to unpack. So you could take one in particular, like there's lots of bits where we're looking kind of at the way that race played out all through the period with which he was an artist. So you're not just looking at him, but through him you see how that impacted who was listening to which kinds of music, or types of music that came from the Black community then being covered by white people, and where you could perform, and things like that. And then there's also the element of queerness and his sexuality, and I love that quote, talking about how queerness isn't just about sexuality, but it's also about anything that's different from the norm. And that's something that we're still seems often taboo, or we're grappling with today, and is always kind of being talked about when we're talking about artists. So what do you think some of the key themes were that you wanted to explore through his story?
Well, certainly this idea of appropriation versus obliteration is something that is central to Richard's struggle. This idea that we can elevate Elvis and erase Richard, that we can know so much about one artist, and another artist who influenced Elvis so much is not included or represented as much as he should be in the pantheon of rock and roll artists. Certainly, race is you cannot distinguish his treatment or the obstacles that he was able to overcome because racism is alive and kicking, that Richard is able to triumph in some cases, but also be a victim. I think what happened with his rights to his music was certainly a part of a structure that, had no issue taking advantage of the cultural product of Black people. I think this idea of what does it mean to be transgressive? How does culture change? How does one person create a ripple effect that broadens the scope of representation, broadens the scope of what becomes more normal for people? How is it that, one of the most popular shows is RuPaul's Drag Race, the concept of drag culture, which has been around for so long, is something that is part of popular entertainment now.
And, did you ever find it challenging as well? I guess, not, you don't want to kind of gloss over some of those contradictions, particularly later in his life and, almost kind of internalizing some of those, like the lack of tolerance that was in society, certainly in the time that he was growing up. And almost, feeling himself like a guilt that he had transgressed by turning toward the church and so on and so forth. How did you want to try and grapple that? And, you don't want to gloss over things, and you can't always rationalize the way someone's behaved, but you want to kind of stay true to their story.
Well, this film is not about hagiography. It's not just like, oh, Richards did this, and isn't he great because he did that? This is the interrogation of a person's life, led by them telling their story. But it was important to kind of question and be in conversation with Richard at times, because he is saying things that for us in the audience, we cannot just accept his word as the only word on a subject. So, for example, when he's like, I have to become, ultra feminine and wear makeup so that I can travel through the South and, and not be killed because, white women come to my shows and they throw their panties at the stage. It's important to have the scholar Tavia Nyong'o come in, enter in and say, that doesn't really make sense to us. Homophobia is rampant and homosexuality is illegal. And because, Richard is kind of just throwing out this concept of like, yes, I did this and everything was okay. But it is more complicated than that. And that's certainly the role, particularly of the scholars and even some, family and friends, to counter some of the ideas that Richard as an unreliable narrator presents.
And ultimately, what do you hope people take away from watching the documentary? I mean, I think it's going to be, it's just so, the dazzling visual language that you've used. So it's such, a joy to watch it, but it's also very educational for people who perhaps don't know the full story of Little Richard. And it is kind of a tribute to his legacy, this idea that his DNA is in so much of music, and he has made this incredible impact on so many of the artists we even watched today.
Yes, it's I think finding a vocabulary that spoke to the inventiveness, the energy that he brought, and how he's singular, he's elemental, he's intergalactic, he is just so spectacular. It was important, and what people tell me when they watch the film is all of this lends to an immersive experience on his journey that I think then leads to empathy for the divided soul that he was.
And how do you think this film sort of fits in with others that you've done so far? And do you know what you're going to work on next?
Well, I am always interested in outliers, those people who have big visions, and make great contributions to culture, and who, teach us how to pick up the crayons and draw outside the lines. Um, Lots of interesting things I'm looking at, but right now it's all Little Richard all the time.
And the other thing I just wanted to ask mine is, watching that your film, it did make me wonder. Of course, in lots of ways, we have progressed in society, and people are much more free to be who they want to be. But I don't know if it's necessarily kind of a straight line forward. It does feel like there's lots of areas of culture that are actually kind of going backwards, and even being more strict about, well, which box do you fit in? Are you this or you're that? Whereas sometimes when you look back, you think, hang on a second, if it's David Bowie or Prince, or actually were we asking less questions back then than maybe we are asking now? Do you think that we are more tolerant, open society now, or do you think there's some contradictions there?
Oh, there's tremendous contradictions. I think culture is always taking, four giant steps forwards and three giant steps to the side. It is not a straight line. And I think that's what the arc of history shows us, is that progress is made incrementally. And, I think it is through the arts that we are exposed to possibility.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for sharing all that with me. And I cannot wait for everyone else to have a chance to see this wonderful documentary. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Sarah. Take care. Bye-bye.
See you. Thanks. Bye.